Hi, Mr. Lewis. Welcome back for our second lesson about the Cold War. Now that you know how the Cold War started, and you know that it was a struggle between the United States and the Soviet Union, and of course all of our friends, over capitalism and communism, it's time to tell the story of how American leaders decided to stand up to communists and protect people from having to live under communist rule. Before we jump in, let's preview our topics. We'll start off by understanding the key idea for all of today's lesson: containment. Then we'll learn about how American leaders turned that idea into action. This includes two successes: the Marshall Plan and the Berlin Airlift. We'll learn how we and our friends, and the Soviet Union and their friends, ended up dividing into two groups called NATO and the Warsaw Pact. Then we'll finish with the story of containment in Asia, which did not go so well. This includes the story of Chinese communism, the Korean War, and how domino theory led America into the Vietnam War. Let's get started. When the Soviet Red Army began the long, slow process of pushing back the German army, it took over the small countries of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania along the Baltic Sea. As they went, communist armies took control of the governments of Romania and Bulgaria. By the fall of 1945, it was clear that the Soviet-supported communists had complete control of Poland. It was only a matter of time before Hungary and Czechoslovakia fell under Soviet control. Western countries began to panic when Joseph Stalin ordered the creation of a communist government in East Germany. American leaders saw that the people of Europe were looking for strong leaders and needed help to recover from the war. If the communists gave them the help they needed, they might turn to Stalin and choose communism. Would the Soviets get all of Germany? What about Italy and France? President Truman wanted to stop this from happening. Americans were tired from fighting World War II and did not want to send soldiers into Eastern Europe to take land away from Stalin's Red Army. So fighting the Soviet Union would have been impossible. Instead, George Kennan of the State Department suggested a different plan. His idea was called containment. In places where communism might grow, American money would be used to stop it. By supporting freely elected governments, the United States might be able to contain communism where it already was and stop it from spreading. Using American money in this way became known as the Truman Doctrine. Greece and Turkey were the first countries in danger of being taken over by communist leaders. They had not been occupied by the Soviet army, but both countries were about to be taken over by Soviet-supported fighters. Truman decided to act. In March 1947, he asked Congress for $400 million to send to these two countries to help their armies and businesses. In just 2 years, the help from America had fixed the Greek and Turkish economies and helped restart law and order. The people began to see democracy and the free market system of the United States as the road to peace and a good economy instead of communism. Emergency help for Turkey and Greece worked to fix those two countries. But all of Europe was damaged by the war. The war had ruined farms and destroyed roads and bridges. The people of the whole continent were in need. In 1947, Secretary of State George Marshall announced the European Recovery Program, which would do for all of Europe what had been done for Greece and Turkey. To avoid making the Soviet Union angry, Marshall said that the purpose of sending money to Western Europe was only to help people, not fight communism, and even offered to give money to the communist countries of the East, but Stalin refused. He knew that American money could change the hearts and minds of the people in his half of Europe the same way it had in Greece and Turkey. In the end, Congress agreed to spend $17 billion over 4 years in Great Britain, France, West Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, and Belgium. The Marshall Plan saved Western Europe. After 4 years, the Western European factories were making twice as much as they had before the war broke out. The money from America also led to more trade with American companies, which helped the United States. Some Americans did not like how much of their money was being given away, but peace and freedom in Western Europe turned out to be a good deal. Most importantly, none of the countries of Western Europe that got money under the Marshall Plan were ever close to becoming communist. Instead, the countries are and were and continue to be America's closest friends. Berlin, Germany's capital city, was the hardest of all the problems between the United States and Soviet Union during the late 1940s, and it became a symbol of the Cold War. Just like the rest of Germany, the city was split into 4 zones of occupation. However, the entire city lay within the Soviet zone of occupation, miles from the rest of West Germany. Once the country of East Germany was created, the Allied parts of the capital, known as West Berlin, became like an island of democracy and capitalism behind the Iron Curtain. West Berlin made Stalin look bad. Thousands of East Germans were moving to West Berlin and then on to West Germany to escape the new communist government in the East. Stalin wanted the Allies out of the city. In June 1948, he decided to close all the roads and railroads going into West Berlin. Since the borders of West Berlin had been open since the end of the war, most of what the people of the city used, especially food and fuel, came from East Germany. Stalin thought that the Western countries were tired and that they would not go to war to protect the city. Faced with hunger, he thought the Americans would give up and leave the city, or the people of West Berlin might throw the Americans out in order to end the blockade. Either way, he thought the United States would leave West Berlin and Stalin would be able to make the city part of communist East Germany. Truman had a hard choice. Giving up West Berlin to the Soviets would hurt his new idea of containment. Any deal would suggest that the Soviet Union could create a crisis at any time to get what it wanted. If Berlin was lost, the whole of West Germany might start to wonder if the United States really cared about German democracy. To Harry Truman, there was no question. "We are going to stay," he said. Together with Great Britain, the United States began moving huge amounts of food and supplies into West Berlin by air. At first, Stalin thought the airlift would fail, and there was every reason to believe it would. After 1945, the Allies had gotten rid of many of the large airplanes in their air forces, and most of the pilots had left the military. It was possible there might just not be enough planes and pilots to deliver the food and fuel the people of West Berlin would need to keep from starving and freezing during the coming winter. There was also a problem of where to land. There were only 3 airports in West Berlin. But once again, a leader rose to the challenge. General William Turner organized around-the-clock flights. By the time the airlift ended, the Allies were delivering 4,000 tons of supplies every day. At the height of the airlift, a plane was landing in West Berlin every minute. With the airlift, Truman turned things around on Stalin. Now the choice between war and peace was in Stalin's hands. Instead of Americans starting a war to break the land blockade, Stalin would have to start a war to end the airlift by shooting down the Allied planes. He decided not to give that order. Over the next 11 months, Stalin began to look bad in the eyes of the world. He was clearly willing to hurt innocent people in order to spread communism. After more than a year, in May 1949, the Soviets ended the blockade. The United States and Britain had flown over 250,000 supply missions, and the airlift had been a success. The idea of containment had worked. And even more importantly, the Americans and British had shown to the people of West Berlin, West Germany, and the world that they would stand up to the Soviet Union to defend freedom. To help protect themselves from more trouble from Stalin, the Western Allies made the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, in 1949. The agreement used the idea of collective security. If any one of the member countries was attacked, all agreed to fight back together. The original NATO members were Britain, France, Italy, the Netherlands, Belgium, Canada, Iceland, Luxembourg, Denmark, Norway, Portugal, and the United States. Later, Greece and Turkey were added. These 2 countries were old enemies, and Turkey is mostly a Muslim country, but they're neighbors in the Black and the Mediterranean Seas. With Greece, Turkey, Denmark, Norway, and Iceland, all members of NATO, the West could keep an eye on the Soviet Navy as it came and went from the Mediterranean and Baltic Seas. In his farewell address in 1796, George Washington had warned Americans not to get involved with other countries or make promises that might get them into a war. For most of its history, the United States had followed this isolationist way of thinking. By helping to start NATO, the United States finally said goodbye to isolationism and jumped forward as the most important superpower in the fight for freedom. In 1955, West Germany joined NATO, which made the Soviet Union and the communist nations of the Eastern Bloc make their own mutual defense alliance. Because it was signed in the Polish city of Warsaw, their agreement was called the Warsaw Pact. Like the members of NATO, the Warsaw Pact countries worked together, trained together, and shared technology and bases. At the time, NATO and the Warsaw Pact were names that people used to mean the West and the communist East, even though there were countries on both sides of the Iron Curtain that did not want to join either alliance. When the Cold War ended in 1991, the Warsaw Pact ended. NATO, on the other hand, still exists today. It has grown and now includes some of the old Warsaw Pact countries, which today's Russian leaders do not like. The crisis in Berlin was the first test of how much Truman believed in containment, but there was never any fighting in the Berlin airlift. In Asia, however, a long land war was to be a great test of Truman's determination. Unlike in Europe, containment had not gone well in Asia. First, and most importantly, China had been taken over by communists. This was not surprising. The change of China into a communist country had started long before the Cold War. In 1912, the Qing family of Chinese emperors lost power as leaders in different parts of the country picked Sun Yat-sen to be the first president of the Republic of China. Although Sun became the first president, he was unable to keep control, since leaders in many provinces also wanted power. Sun did not have any army of his own, and over the next 10 years fighting, not peace, was common in China. In the 1920s, Sun Yat-sen created a base in southern China and tried to set out to join the divided country. With help from the Soviet Union, he made a deal with the growing Communist Party of China. After Sun's death from cancer in 1925, one of his followers, Chiang Kai-shek, took control of the Kuomintang, Sun's political party. Chiang was able to bring most of southern and central China together under his control in a fight called the Northern Expedition. In 1927, Chiang tried to make sure he had power and turned on the communists who had helped him. In 1934, pushed from their northern mountain bases, the communist forces started the Long March to the northwest, where they made a base in Shanxi province. During the Long March, communists got a new leader, Mao Zedong. Chiang Kai-shek's Kuomintang were nationalists, and Mao Zedong's Chinese Communist Party put their fight on hold between 1937 and 1945, when they both fought against the Japanese. After Japan lost World War II in 1945, the war between the nationalists and the communists started up again. After 3 years of fighting, Mao and the communists were about to win. Chiang Kai-shek and about 2 million nationalist Chinese left mainland China and moved to the island of Formosa, which today we call Taiwan. Mao Zedong declared the People's Republic of China with its capital in Beijing. In December 1949, Chiang declared Taipei, Taiwan, the temporary capital of the Republic of China. To this day, both the communist government in Beijing and the nationalist government in Taipei say they are the real leaders of all of China. But in reality, mainland China and the island of Taiwan are like two different countries. Although the United States had not been involved in the Chinese Civil War, people did not like it that President Truman had not stopped the march of Mao's army. China, the country with the most people on earth, had become the world's second communist country. How could he let this happen? What did it mean for the rest of Asia? It didn't take long to find out. Truman's next test of containment was going to be in Korea. When the Soviet Union entered World War II against Japan, they sent their army into Japanese-occupied Korea. American soldiers landed in the southern part of the Korean peninsula. And when Japan surrendered in 1945, Korea split into a Soviet northern area and an American southern area at the 38th parallel. Korea began to look like divided Germany. The United Nations wanted to have an election to choose leaders who would join North and South Korea together. But the North's communist leaders thought that the Americans would somehow cheat and refuse to be a part of the election. The election went forward in the South, and Syngman Rhee became president. But the Soviets supported Kim Il-sung as leader of the North. When the American and Soviet armies left Korea in 1949, trouble began. Kim Il-sung did not want to be the leader of only the northern half of China. On June 25, 1950, his army crossed the 38th parallel into the south. It took only 2 days for President Truman to promise that the United States would fight to protect South Korea. Truman hoped to build a coalition of many countries to help, and went to the United Nations for support. Of course, the Soviet Union had the right to veto any proposal in the Security Council, so normally they would have stopped the UN from doing anything about the war in Korea. But this time the Americans were in luck. The Soviets were refusing to come to the Security Council meetings because China's seat at the UN was still held by the nationalist government in Taiwan. So the Council all voted to fight back against the army of North Korea. Many countries sent soldiers to defend the South, but most came from the United States and South Korea. The leader of the United Nations soldiers was Douglas MacArthur, the hero of World War II in the Pacific and leader of the American occupation of Japan. He had a hard fight, as the North had taken over all of Korea except for a small area around the city of Busan in the far south. MacArthur decided to land his soldiers on the beach at Incheon and attack the western side of Korea. It was one of the most brilliant plans of his career. Caught by surprise, the communist Northern Army pulled back. The American soldiers from Incheon and Busan quickly pushed the North Koreans to the 38th parallel and then past it. MacArthur, Truman, and the Americans saw a chance to join all of Korea and then pushed Kim's army all the way up to the Yalu River, the border between Korea and China. Truman liked the idea of joining North and South Korea, but his hopes were broken in November when over 400,000 Chinese soldiers crossed the Yalu River. Both Truman and MacArthur thought that the Chinese would want to stay out of the fight, but Mao Zedong had decided to come to help his communist neighbor. American troops were once again pushed south of the 30th parallel. General MacArthur saw the war as a great struggle between the evil forces of communism, or against the evil force of communism. He thought that the war in Korea was like World War II and wanted nothing less than total victory. He wanted to bomb China and even talked about using nuclear weapons. In MacArthur's mind, not winning was the same as losing. Truman did not think so. He was afraid that attacking China could lead to another world war, especially if the Soviet Union decided to help China. Actually, China was also holding back. They could have attacked American bases in Japan that were used to support the war in Korea, but like Truman, had decided to fight the war only in Korea. MacArthur was unhappy with Truman's ideas and took his case directly to the American people by saying that he did not agree with Truman in public. The Constitution gives the power of commander-in-chief of the army, military, to an elected president. Truman thought that if he gave in to MacArthur, it might look like the president was taking orders from the military rather than the other way around. So Truman ordered that MacArthur be replaced as leader in Korea and Japan. Truman's decision was unpopular. Some Republicans in Congress wanted to remove him as president. MacArthur was a war hero. When he flew home to the United States, 50,000 people came to watch him in a parade. MacArthur was invited to give a speech to Congress, the only military leader ever to do so. At the same time, only 22% of people said they liked Truman, the lowest ever for any president since people started taking this poll. In his speech, MacArthur said, "It has been said that I was a warmonger. Nothing could be further from the truth. I know war as few other men now living know it, and nothing to me is more revolting. But once war is forced upon us, there is no other alternative than to apply every available means to bring it to a swift end. War's very object is victory, not prolonged indecision. In war, there can be no substitute for victory." In the end, though, Truman was president, and his idea about the best end of the war in Korea was not total victory against every communist country, but a split Korea, into North and South. The war itself had turned into a stalemate, in which no side was winning, and Korea was split mostly along the 30th parallel where things had started 3 years before. It took 2 more years, but finally in 1953 an armistice was signed to stop the fighting. North Korea was still a communist dictatorship under Kim Il-sung, and South Korea was still under the control of Syngman Rhee, who ruled for 12 years as a dictator, but, in the opinion of the United States, at least not a communist dictator. Over 5 million people died in the Korean War, and only half of these were soldiers. In all, 37,000 Americans died in the war. Today, Korea is still divided by a 3-mile-wide demilitarized zone, or DMZ, guarded on both sides by watching armies. Kim Il-sung was succeeded by his son, Kim Jong-il, and then by his grandson, Kim Jong-un. Helped today only by China, North Korea is one of the world's poorest and most isolated countries. Over time, South Korea started holding elections, became a modern country, and is an important trading partner of the United States. Korean products such as Samsung Electronics and Hyundai cars can be found everywhere in America. And American products and soldiers are easy to find in South Korea. In 2017, there were still 37,500 American soldiers in South Korea, standing guard against another attack from the north. The forces of freedom and democracy might not have won a total victory in Korea, but they didn't lose either. Vietnam, another country in Asia, turned out much worse. The 1800s and the early 1900s was a time of imperialism. The United States took over Hawaii and the Philippines, Great Britain took over India, and all the major countries of Europe split up Africa. The lands of Southeast Asia, where Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia are today, were once a part of the French colony of Indochina. After World War I, an independence movement started in Vietnam led by Ho Chi Minh. Ho had lived in Europe where he had learned about communism. Ho did not like the French and fought against them, and when the Japanese attacked Vietnam during World War II, he fought them as well. His independence movement, called the Viet Minh, was able to take over many cities in 1945. When the Japanese lost World War II, Ho gave a victory speech in Hanoi. Using words from Thomas Jefferson's Declaration of Independence, Ho announced a new independent country of Vietnam. But things did not go easily for the Vietnamese who wanted independence, because France wanted to take back all its colonies after World War II. The United States now had an interesting problem. Americans usually like to help people become independent. Normally, the United States would have helped Ho Chi Minh. The American Army had helped him during World War II in his fight against Japan. However, given Truman's new strategy of containment, helping the communist Viet Minh was just not possible. Vietnam was a small country compared to China, Korea, or Japan, and most Americans had never heard of it and probably couldn't find it on a map. However, for American leaders, Vietnam was very important because they believed in the domino theory. Like a line of dominoes in which a falling domino knocks down the next, which knocks down the next, and so on, a communist victory in Vietnam might lead to communist victories in Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, Malaysia, and Indonesia. This would have been a nightmare for American leaders who believed in containment. President Truman decided to support France as it tried to take back Indochina. The United States gave almost $1 billion each year to France. For Ho Chi Minh and the Vietnamese, America's help for the French seemed like a betrayal. How could a country who they so admired help the colonizers? The French, for their part, found Ho Chi Minh to be a strong enemy. Between 1945 and 1954, a fierce war went on. Slowly but surely, the Viet Minh wore down the French. In the end, a large group of French soldiers was surrounded by the Vietnamese under Communist General Diem Bien Phu. After a long fight, the French gave up. This final loss convinced the French to give up their hopes of taking back their lost colony. The French left Vietnam, leaving Ho Chi Minh in control of the northern half of the country. An agreement, signed in Geneva, Switzerland, split Vietnam at the 17th parallel. The land north of this line would be led by Ho Chi Minh, with Hanoi as its capital. The southern half named the city of Saigon its capital, and Ngo Dinh Diem its leader. Splitting Vietnam was supposed to only be for a short time. In 1956, there were going to be an election to choose the new leader for all of the country. But since they knew that Ho Chi Minh was popular and would win the election, the South made sure these elections were never held. President Eisenhower and Kennedy gave money, weapons, and sent military helpers to South Vietnam. Ho Chi Minh turned North Vietnam into a communist dictatorship and started a new group of fighters called the Viet Cong. Their job was to take over the South and make all of Vietnam one country again. In the first of many times during the Cold War, the United States helped an unpopular leader in Ngo Dinh Diem. Diem used his power to help his friends, did not let people vote, and favored Catholics, which made most of Vietnam's people who were Buddhist unhappy. But Diem was not a communist, which was the most important thing that the United States was looking for around the world during the Cold War. Presidents Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy, Nixon, and Ford all tried to find a way to stop the spread of communism in Southeast Asia without being on the wrong side of history. In the end, America's leaders failed. The United States ended up in a long, hard war that we lost. Ho Chi Minh succeeded in bringing all of Vietnam together as a communist country. That concludes our story of containment. Before we go, let's recap the big ideas. After World War II, Americans did not want to fight to stop communism. So leaders like President Truman decided to just stop communism from spreading to new places. This was called containment. Americans were afraid that poverty and political instability in Europe would give communists a chance to spread their ideas. To stop this, Truman announced the Marshall Plan, in which the United States gave billions of dollars to places like France, West Germany, Greece, and Japan to help them rebuild. Stalin was angry that part of the city of Berlin was run by non-communists. To force the Americans, British, and French out, he blockaded the city, preventing food and fuel from being brought in. Truman saw the conflict as a test of his willingness to stand up to communists and organize the Berlin airlift. After more than a year, Stalin gave up. It was an important early victory for containment. Both the United States and Soviet Union wanted allies. The United States and its allies in Western Europe formed NATO. The Soviet Union and its allies in Eastern Europe formed the Warsaw Pact. Both alliances were for mutual defense. If any country was attacked, everyone would join the fight in their defense. After World War II, Mao Zedong and his communist followers took over mainland China. The non-communists escaped to the island of Taiwan. In 1950, the communists who controlled North Korea invaded South Korea, and the United States led a fight to defend them. Korea was another important test of containment. No one won the war, and Korea is still divided between a communist North and a non-communist South. During the Korean War, General Douglas MacArthur wanted to expand the war into China and defeat communism once and for all, but Truman fired him. In the end, American leaders came to believe in a domino theory. This was the idea that if one nation became communist, its neighbors would also soon be taken over by communists. Americans ended up fighting in Vietnam because of the domino theory. They thought every country, no matter how small, needed to be protected from communism. Thank you very much for sticking with me to the very end. In our next lesson, we'll turn back to the story of the atomic bomb and how atomic weapons made the world a very dangerous place, but strangely, also stopped us from actually going to war at all. I'll see you then.